It's 5:45 in the morning in Coburg North in Melbourne. This van is loaded with bodies. They're about to be taken 200 kilometres north to New South Wales for cremation.
At the end of the day, these people aren't meat. They can't just be shipped around because it's convenient.
The van is owned by one of Australia's largest independent funeral companies.
Do you tell customers that their loved one could be going with potentially 4 other people in a van up the highway over the border?
It's not something that we don't disclose.
Most Australians will organise at least one funeral in their lifetime, but many of us have no idea how funeral companies deal with the dead.
Our biggest concern is most of the public believe or think we're a regulated industry. We're not a regulated industry.
I'm sometimes horrified by some of the things I come across in the funeral industry. The general underlying overcharging, bad behaviour, pressuring of families, things like that, is very concerning. And I think a lot of people would be very uncomfortable if they knew that families at their most vulnerable and most grieving are often being manipulated.
Treating the person who's passed away with dignity is incredibly important. I, at times, shudder to think when I pass away, if nothing's changed, I don't necessarily want to go through the process as it is today with many companies. It can be improved and it should be improved.
Tonight on Four Corners, we investigate what goes on behind the scenes in this largely unregulated industry. We expose the questionable tactics some funeral companies use to win business and make profits from grieving families. We also reveal why they keep getting away with it.
Last year, more than 150,000 people died in Australia, and most ended up in the hands of a funeral director. Caring for the dead is now a $1.6 billion industry. Nigel Davies owns Melbourne's oldest funeral home and offers some unusual ways to say goodbye. So Nigel, what can you do with your loved one's ashes?
You can have the urns that are designed to sink in water in case you want to do the cremated version of burial at sea. You can have the jewellery that you wear around the neck. My mother-in-law has her husband's ashes under the bed and her dog's ashes around her neck, which shows their appropriate status in her life. In the extreme case, we have somebody in the US at the moment who is being converted to 5 diamonds, 6 grand a diamond, so 30 grand to have your loved one make a nice necklace, presumably.
What's the next frontier for what you can do with your loved one once they're gone?
I have met somebody who had his mother's ashes converted to ink and literally has his mother tattooed to his arm.
There's a coffin to suit every taste.
We've got everything from the wool coffin that we have over here, which is obviously for people who want to feel a bit warmer and cuddlier than your traditional timber boxes.
There are eco-friendly options.
Pure calico, unbleached natural material is the ultimate in the enviro-friendly.
Across Australia, the most basic goodbye, a cremation with no funeral service, can cost as little as $1,250. The more elaborate can reach the tens of thousands.
You can get a solid gold one, I think $60,000, $70,000 if you're going to go top end. Not that I've sold one of those.
Nigel Davies believes grieving families are open to exploitation.
My biggest concern is effectively families being coerced into things that aren't necessary or aren't appropriate. Really, the funeral industry is like any other industry. There's going to be 5% saints and 5% sinners. The trouble with the funeral industry is the 5% sinners people should be complaining about, but they're not, because they can't cope with the emotional cost of complaining about them.
I think it's problematic when the industry is known for its opacity, and quite a number of incidences where we see that the industry is being accused of exploitative practices. At the moment, in most states, anyone can go and hang out a shingle and become a funeral director without any training.
What's the time by you?
11:10.
Nigel Davies' staff have just collected a body for cremation.
She's tagged.
Okay.
They do around 500 funerals a year. But independent funeral homes like these are being gobbled up by large corporates.
If you look at some of the bigger brands, they are shareholder focused, revenue focused. You know, there is a very big dollar component attached to the way that they work. That's just them. I don't believe funeral service belongs in a shareholding environment. You know, it's not an environment where you should be pushing the absolute or optimising every dollar out of every family.
Carly Dalton has her own funeral home and is the president of the Association of Independent Funeral Professionals. She went out on her own because she didn't like the industrial approach of the big companies.
There would be 3 or 4 embalming tables and 3 or 4 embalmers working all together, male and female, and a lot of activity.
There's no privacy.
Well, it's open. You know, you have hearse drivers coming in saying, is Mrs. Such and Such ready? Is Mr. Brown ready? You know, where's the paperwork for this? Where's this for that? It's bustling, you know, a lot of activity, a lot of noise and a lot of work.
Carly Dalton says the corporate business model can lead to higher prices for customers.
With a lot of the other bigger funeral companies, there's a lot of overheads. They have lots of offices, lots of chapels. There's a lot of money tied up and invested. So with that, there needs to be revenue made to pay for that infrastructure.
The lack of price transparency in the funeral industry is centred on the fact that they sell you a package. And from within that package, it's very difficult to understand what the components that you're buying that make that package up. And the feedback that I've received, there's a serious amount of exploitation going on where people are being, you know, upsold or sold products and services that they don't really need.
Sandra Vanderlaan is a professor of accounting who's investigated the funeral industry.
The bottom line is that every consumer in the funeral industry is vulnerable. So therefore I think that the industry has got a higher duty of care towards the consumers that buying products that they don't necessarily need or want and maybe can't afford.
For some bereaved families, dealing with a funeral company can be a traumatic experience.
He had everybody under control.
He did.
In 2012, Ali Stroud's 22-year-old son, Tom, was killed in a car accident.
We never got to talk about these or look at these again. We haven't looked at these for ages.
Victoria's Transport Accident Commission gave the family $10,000 to cover the funeral. They chose Lapine, one of the best-known brands in the state.
We started walking around, selecting coffins and being asked a multitude of questions. It's quite surreal. And during that time, a flurry of things are rushing through your head. But we made the selections, got to a point where we're finished for that day or that time. And we checked in as to where we were, you know, price-wise, to ensure that we hadn't gone over our budget. We, you know, checked in and find out, you know, are we within our limits? And we were advised at the time, yeah, we were.
They were pleased with the service, but shocked when they received an email from Lapine 2 months later saying they'd gone way over their $10,000 budget.
It was a massive difference. It wasn't just $100 or $200, it was $4,700. And we just couldn't fathom it. And I said, you can't do this, it's not right. And tried to reach an agreement to which we couldn't. They knew what the costs were. They just didn't advise us. And, you know, whether it was a mistake, I'll never know. Whether it was just outright price gouging, is my gut feel, because of the way they handled the whole situation afterwards. I mean, if you're clean and legitimate in what you're doing, you have no issue in presenting it and at the time and going, well, there's your cost, guys, you've gone 50% over, are you okay with that? And more importantly, you know, can you afford it? You know, and we didn't get that. We just got a bill, you know, a few weeks later, and then threats. Pay it, otherwise, you know, you'll have debt collectors, and I imagine credit rating will be, you know, and the list just goes on.
Despite the family's concern over the bill, Lapine contacted them repeatedly and sent the account to the company's debt collection agency.
When they couldn't get past me, unbeknownst to myself, they actually targeted Daniel, Tom's father, because he put his name on the paperwork. So they omitted me from the process and then just went after, they hounded him. My wife was so upset, and she knew, like, I'm hard, I won't yield, and she just didn't want to be seen not paying for her son's funeral. And I had to pay it off. Sorry.
Take your time.
Had to pay it off over the course of a year. And they were just uncompromising, and there was nothing I could do about it, because once you've paid it, that's it. It was too bad. There's nowhere to complain to.
Funeral providers, mortuaries.
Martin Earp is the CEO of InvoCare, the company that owns Lapine.
Where we let the family down is that we didn't inform the family that those additional requests were going to go over and above the cap of the government in terms of the government contribution. And unfortunately, they were surprised that when we billed them for those additional services.
Why wasn't the family told?
Despite the fact that we have policies and procedures in place, we are a business that has over 1,800 people within it. When you deal with people, unfortunately, from time to time, people will make mistakes. And in this case, there was a mistake made.
Thomas's stepfather, Gavin, believes it was price gouging, was it?
InvoCare always looks to price fairly. We always make sure that we sit down and talk through with the families what it is that they're doing, what their arrangements will cost, and we're very clear and open about that. In this instance, where we obviously failed to tell the family that they were going to incur those additional charges as opposed to the government paying for them, is entirely our fault, and I apologise for that.
InvoCare is the biggest funeral operator in Australia. The company says last year it conducted about 22% of the nation's funerals. Its brands include Simplicity, Guardian, Value Cremations. Its premium offering is White Lady.
The White Lady brand was established over 30 years ago. It's a very iconic Australian brand. And I think the main reason that they choose it, partly, is because it is completely different to what I would call the traditional male-dominated product that existed for many, many years within our industry. So there is an attraction to having an all-female and all-lady service.
A basic service through White Lady can start at $7,000, but this doesn't include the cost of cremation or burial. InvoCare brands have different price points, but bodies often end up in the same mortuary and are treated by the same staff.
Most of the back-of-house stuff's done by the same people, no matter which brand you go to. So whether you're using one of the InvoCare brands, the transfers into the facilities and the preparation is all pretty much done by the same people. So it doesn't matter which brand you're using, the facilities where the preparation takes place or the supplier of the various products all come from the same place.
So whether you're paying $10,000 for one InvoCare brand or $3,000, behind the scenes it's all the same?
Pretty much, yep. Pretty much.
It may well happen in the same mortuary, But I mean, much like going to a restaurant, you may order a different meal. Your main course may be a lot more than someone else's. It still happens in the same kitchen.
Until 2012, Terry Clifton worked for InvoCare's Lapine brand in Melbourne. He's now a competitor, running his own small funeral business after becoming frustrated with the company's operations and sales tactics.
It's the way that the staff are conditioned to upsell or push the product or the add-ons to a funeral itself, yeah.
Give us some examples of that.
Things like funeral stationery, it could be memorial books, flowers, DVD presentations and stuff, where a lot of those can be done, some of that stuff can be done by families. The funeral homes tend to sort of push those add-ons to upsell themselves and make a little bit more profit out of the funeral.
Martin Earp says in recent years there have been no incentives for upselling.
Has the company in the past had incentives for staff to upsell products?
In the past, there may well have been some incentives. Certainly under my watch, we're all about rewarding excellent customer service.
Michael Cox is a qualified embalmer who runs his own funeral home. He's been in the industry for 22 years.
This lady actually passed away at home over a week ago.
He wants funeral directors to be more open about how they conduct their business and treat the dead with more respect.
What are some of the worst things you and your staff have seen?
Rubbish out of a garbage bin being put into a coffin, because either they've got no medical waste bin or just purely because they want to get rid of some rubbish and it's been put into the coffin with the deceased. If they've run out of room in the core room, they'll put deceased people top to toe on the same tray because they won't say no to a funeral. A crematorium run out to a large crematorium in Melbourne. The staff member concerned came back and said, look, I've just, a station wagon pulled up with 3 coffins stacked on top of each other. So 2 and then 1 on top. Not strapped in, just loaded into the back of the wagon. That same crematorium, the staff there have also told me that they pulled coat hangers out of the chamber. So when the cremation chamber is where the cremation happens. So clearly the families have provided clothing and the clothing's just been thrown into the coffin with the person, coat hanger and all.
Michael Cox despairs at the lack of oversight of funeral directors and mortuaries.
At no stage has our local council ever been down to do an inspection to see how it looks or how we're keeping the deceased. We need licensing and we need regulations in terms of, appropriate standards for the care of the deceased person.
Our biggest concern is most of the public believe or think we're a regulated industry. We're not a regulated industry. The industry needs regulation because the role that we play in a community is a significant role. And the role we also play, it's important that we get it right. It's important for the family, it's important for the family's children to know that the person they love and cared for is cared for in an appropriate way.
Right, so this is where we start, our basic coffin. You'll get that particular coffin from start to finish with all our work for $2,900.
Ian Gibson runs White Dove Funeral Care in Dandenong South in Melbourne. He's been in the business for nearly 30 years.
You get all our services from start to finish, collecting the deceased from place of death, preparation and that.
He bills himself as a respectful operator. But not everyone is happy with the service he provides.
I operate with no airs and graces. What you see is what you get. Honesty, upfront, transparent, and that's it. And I don't beat everybody down to the last dollar.
Father Albert Yogaraja encountered Ian Gibson in 2013. Grade 5 and prep children were leaving his church after morning mass and he was preparing for a funeral. Before the children were out of the building, the coffin had been brought into the church. The lid was open and the body was inside.
I turned around to see that the coffin was already in the church opened and children were still there. And teachers are hurriedly gathering and taking them away. So I got very upset because children are exposed to the open coffin there.
Father Albert says the children were traumatised, so he asked Ian Gibson to close the coffin.
Then he told me, look here, I am the funeral director, I am in charge, so you do whatever I am telling you to do, that's why you are paid for. So I was trying to get out. What he did was he opened his hands, blocked the entrance and pushed me with his tummy back to my place, First he did, second time also he did, then I told him that I will call the police. This harassment, I'll call the police. Then third time when I tried to get out, he pushed me and meanwhile my assistant also walked in. I pushed him away and came out.
Father Albert, his mass was well and truly finished. A family member had rocked into the city 3 o'clock in the morning and that family requested a viewing and we weren't to know that Father Albert would disallow a viewing in that church.
He says there were still children in the church when you opened the coffin.
He's telling porkies, and I'm not going up that path anymore.
Ian Gibson was banned from conducting any more funerals in the parish, but he kept operating. 3 years later, he did the funeral of Nikki Lee, who committed suicide at just 38 years of age.
His manner was quite strange. Not much empathy. This smirk that came and went. He'd taken the details for the death certificate and he was going out the door and turned around and said, oh, well, how did she kill herself? We want to know what kind of body to expect with a smirk on his face. And we were just stunned.
Nikki's mother, Lynn Jones, wanted to see her daughter one last time and went to Ian Gibson's funeral home for a viewing.
At the viewing, I was a bit surprised that she was lying there with her mouth partly open and you could see her teeth. And I said to Ian, well, why are you showing her teeth? Oh, she had such nice teeth. And then a friend of the family was right there. And she said, but that's not the usual way that the funeral director presents the face. He said, oh, well, she had nice teeth, and then said to my friend, unlike yours, and I can tell your age by your teeth, and because I used to be able to work out the age of sheep.
None of these experiences compare with what happened to the family of Michelle Appleton. In 2015, the Melbourne mother was dying of cancer.
Michelle was planning her death and the way she wanted to look. I know it might sound funny, but she went to a lot of trouble. She picked several outfits. And I think it was her way of getting us adjusted to maybe not having her around. And she'd present the outfits and she'd ask, what do you think would be best with the shoes, these or these?
She wanted a certain pair of shoes that I had to go and find for her, and a certain dress, her nails done, which we had organised, and her hair and makeup fixed properly because she was only 42 when she died.
Michelle Appleton had engaged Ian Gibson's company to do her funeral.
I do remember about 5 days, I think, before she passed, she was so proud of herself that I've done it, Auntie Bo. I've finalised everything. I've got the funeral directors. I've put down exactly how I want everything done. I've paid them. The last things are done.
They told her that they ran women only, kind of like the other companies that do ladies-only services for other ladies. And they convinced her that there would be females there to pick up and prepare her body, which was what she wanted, after she died.
From the moment Michelle died, there were problems.
It was late at night and a man showed up in a van and said, "I'm here to collect her body." And I said, "Well, who are you?" It was organised to be females only to collect her. And he goes, "Oh, me missus is in the car." And I said, "Well, who's collecting her? We wanted females only." And he goes, "Well, it's me. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. This is all you get, or else she's not being picked up."
Nicole was upset, but let them take her mother's body. Then things got worse.
We planned to have a viewing because some of the family wanted to see her before she was cremated. I rang and asked for that, and he said that her body was too bad to be viewed. And we were all in the room when she died. She had had a stroke caused from the cancer spreading to her brain and just didn't wake up. So there was no real bad anything. She just looked normal. Yes, she looked a little bit sick, but it wasn't anything horrific that shouldn't have been able to be viewed. So straight away I've realised there's obviously something wrong as to why he's saying no to a viewing.
Nicole changed funeral directors and they picked up Michelle's body from Ian Gibson. Nicole was horrified when she looked in the coffin.
It was quite obvious that the coffin that Michelle was placed in was not the correct coffin for her dimensions at that stage. Her dress was draped over her, so she wasn't dressed in her dress, and otherwise I'm not a qualified embalmer, so I can't make comments on the preparation of Michelle. I'll take you through. But I do know that Nicole was very upset when she saw her mother.
She was jammed into a coffin that was way too small. Her shoulders were pretty much up. It's just not a normal position at all. And her clothes were just thrown on top of her. Her shoes weren't on her. Her hair was a mess. She had saliva all down the side of her face. Her eyes were black and sunken in. There was just so much stuff not right, and it didn't look anything like what she looked like.
We've seen photos of Michelle Appleton's body clearly in a coffin that's far too small for her.
No.
For her. Do you deny that that happened?
No, the coffin would fit in there easy. The mother, or Michelle, she was no bigger than me, and a standard coffin was the appropriate size.
But Ian, we've seen the photos. Her shoulders are jammed up near her ears. She's clearly squeezed into a coffin that's far too small for her.
She wasn't that big and it wasn't that small, no.
It was pretty reprehensible. And he shouldn't be operating. If you're not going to treat loved ones with respect and care, you shouldn't be operating. And that's the problem in this industry. Not enough people are held responsible for their actions.
After Nicole switched funeral directors and complained on social media, Ian Gibson claimed he'd been defamed.
Were you happy with everything that happened?
He tried to stop the cremation from going ahead by seeking a court injunction, saying he needed the body as evidence.
One of the most important parts of this whole story is that here was a family suffering, and then he was prepared to still take them to court because she lashed out at him and for what he did. After that was what I consider totally unprofessional.
Christian Maxwell is the CEO of the company that took over Michelle's funeral.
Does it worry you that he's still allowed to operate?
Of course, because, you know, for every bad funeral operator, it takes away from the fact that there are good funeral operators and the people who do care and who have passion for the industry.
How has what Ian Gibson's done impacted you and your family?
Sorry.
I understand how Nikki feels. And there's no reason for her to feel she's failed her mum, but she does. And that is not fair and that's not right and that shouldn't be allowed by anybody.
This Appleton story is just I don't know why you've gone back that far. And this Father Albert one, I says, I don't know who's white-handing me for you to get the names of these people, where you found them out from. So you've done a bit of digging with, or somebody is putting the slipper under me. So end of story.
Why would there be several people who have got complaints about you? Why would there be 3 or 4 different people who've completely made this up?
Nothing more to say. Interview terminated. I'm serious. Done.
So you have nothing to say to any of these?
I'm not going into this anymore. I've been set up by you guys. Not interested.
No, we're just putting to you the complaints that have been made.
Yeah, and they're all been done and dusted with. And you're just going to bring them up in front of everybody to get yourself a story, and my name's going to be on the television and tainted. So, forget it. We're done. Yeah, you sold me down the farm. Totally disappointed with you. Totally disappointed in you. It's a beat up.
As a mortuary transport driver in Victoria, Danny Hughes sees another dark side of this industry: how bodies are moved around.
One of the things I don't like is most public hospitals, a lot of nursing homes, will bring the body out through the back door where all the trash and the rubbish, inwards and outwards goods is, instead of through the front door. I don't think it's dignified.
Some nursing homes and hospitals have arrangements with large funeral companies to pick up bodies within hours of a death. In some cases, the family will have already hired a different funeral home.
We, many times, can turn up at a hospital and we'll find the body's not there. The body has already been released to a large funeral company and they're in possession of the body. And I'm aware of dozens and dozens of instances where the family haven't been aware that their loved one has been moved.
Some in the industry say this puts pressure on the family to go with the funeral home that's picked up the body.
The family find out that their loved one, their mum or dad or brother or sister, has gone to a funeral director. And the practice is that that funeral director will then ring the family and the family feel obligated to go in and sit down and arrange a funeral. And what that does to the family is it does not give them the opportunity to consider their options.
In the drive for profits, some companies transport bodies interstate for cremations. This van is leaving Tobin Brothers Mortuary in Melbourne with 5 bodies, bound for New South Wales, where the company owns its own crematorium.
I have concerns about bodies being transported interstate for cremation only because it's the funeral director trying to avoid the fact that, particularly in Victoria, because all cemeteries and crematoria are run by trusts, there's no profit available to the funeral director, whereas if they go over the border into New South Wales, they can make a bit of profit out of the cremation fee as well.
How many bodies would you take at one time?
At times there can be 1, there can be 2, there can be 3 bodies that are transferred to Murray Valley.
Would 3 be the maximum in a van?
No, it can take approximately 4. Can take costs, depending on the size of the coffins, it could take up to 5.
Do you tell customers that their loved one could be going with potentially 4 other people in a van up the highway over the border?
It's not something that we don't disclose.
Do you explicitly tell them that the crematorium is in New South Wales, is over the border?
Yes, all of our, because it's we need to fill out New South Wales health paperwork, which the client family needs to sign off on, and yes, it is implicit that it's on the Murray River over the border.
They say that they do tell families when they sit down with them and get them to sign the paperwork. Is that too late?
I think in my view it is, because once you're sitting down and doing that paperwork, you're probably committed to that funeral director, and As I said, all funeral consumers of funeral products are vulnerable, and at that point in time, you know, if anyone that's experienced this would know, you just want to get it done.
James McLeod says his staff weren't happy with the service provided by Victoria's state-run crematoriums, so the company started taking bodies to New South Wales to its own facility.
It is a profit centre of Tobin Brothers. But it's also important to us that we maintain the care of the deceased in our care, because when we hand it over to a third party, we don't know what their training is, what their expertise are, etc.
The fact that companies are trying to penny pinch by taking bodies outside Victoria for cremation is ridiculous. You're taking someone's loved one, you're driving them, you know, in some instances 300 kilometres in a van where they're shaking around and moving around, when, you know, there's perfect facilities here in Victoria that could cope with that. And in a way it should be illegal. So how did that repat go?
He's come up really well.
Oh, that's fantastic.
A lot of the time spent on him, but if you take a look, like you saw him when he first came in.
Yeah, I saw him when he first came in. The family coming tomorrow for a viewing?
They are. There's a viewing and a rosary tomorrow night, so I think they'll be
they'll
quite
be very happy.
Yeah.
And you'll just do some minor touch-ups?
Yes,
fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Christian Maxwell heads up Zali, a company that owns multiple funeral brands across Victoria and New South Wales.
And then we've just got one infectious diseases?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and you're working...
He sees no need to move bodies across state borders.
Do you think if these funeral companies are being transparent and telling their clients that they're taking their loved one to a different state for a cheaper cremation, is it okay?
I still think no. Because at the end of the day, these people aren't meat. They can't just be shipped around because it's convenient.
An extreme case of shunting bodies around the country for profit happened here in Queensland. South of Brisbane, between 2009 and 2011, 59 bodies were driven 600 kilometres to Rockhampton for cremation without the knowledge of the families. The man who did this is funeral director Anthony James.
Anthony, we just want to ask you a few questions. Why won't you answer questions? There's been a lot of criticism from within the industry about you. Why won't you answer questions?
Despite the grave concerns of the industry, Anthony James has been given permission to open a crematorium in this building in Bethania, south of Queensland's capital.
I'm sometimes horrified by some of the things I come across in the funeral industry. The case of Anthony James in Queensland, who wanting to open a cremation facility, caused a lot of angst to the professional associations. The Australian Cemeteries and Crematoria Association, the Funeral Directors New South Wales, the National Funeral Directors Association.
Four Corners approached Anthony James at his funeral home for comment.
Unfortunately, the council there got back to us and said, well, the only box we have to tick is whether the facilities meet standards. There's nothing about the ethical behaviour of the person that we can deal with. That's state government. And although the local federal member was pushing hard, the state government's response was, it doesn't seem to be a great concern, we'll let it go through. I think the whole industry, the ethical part of the industry, is a bit horrified that governments have that little interest.
This mortuary van is carrying a body that's due to be cremated. In New South Wales, before this can happen, the dead person has to be viewed by a doctor who can verify their identity.
The cremation paper unfortunately states that I am satisfied as to the identity of the body and I have viewed the body. Now this creates a problem where we then here have to transport the person to the doctor's surgery for identification.
In this case, the GP's practice is in a shopping mall. The funeral attendant takes the doctor to where the van is parked, in the loading bay. He opens the body bag and the doctor confirms the identity.
Okay, thank you, Doc.
Today we filmed a doctor walking into a loading dock to identify a body, and there were people loading up fruit and vegetables, there were forklifts and shoppers going by. Is that acceptable?
No, I think it's disgraceful. We've got one doctor who's next to a fish and chip shop. It's ludicrous. It's disrespectful. It's humiliating. And I know our staff are horrified every time they have to do it. And it's just morally wrong. And it shouldn't happen.
Michael Mackay is the head of the New South Wales Funeral Directors Association.
All right, you're good to go.
He says he's been lobbying the government for 15 years to change the form, to bring it in line with other states and end this undignified practice.
Imagine what older people would think if they walked past a van with a body in it and a doctor standing there. It's horrifying for them. The whole scenario is totally wrong.
After being approached by Four Corners, the New South Wales Health Department says it is reviewing the cremation certification requirements.
I really feel sorry for the doctors that are involved in all of this. It's something that they honestly don't want to do, and they're doing it because the law, or New South Wales Health, are saying you must do this.
Losing a loved one is difficult at the best of times. But a bad experience with a funeral director can make it so much worse. Grieving families often become vulnerable consumers, and many think it's time for change.
Look, it's not a very nice industry to be in. We're always at the grieving end. But I think the more open and more honest we are with everybody, I think the better it'll be for everyone.
I question how our government has not got some sort of organised legislation to this. We put our trust and faith in people that are looking after our loved one, and the fact that they can get away with all this, I don't understand it.
If at any stage you doubt or you think, it just doesn't feel right, your intuition's normally always right. If it doesn't feel right from the beginning, it's certainly not going to feel right at the end.